Welcome back once again to a DF Retro Play. I'm John Linneman, and of course, we are playing some 16-bit Mega Drive here with QuackShot, a fantastic platformer made by Sega back in the early 90s. And to discuss that, I am joined by my good buddy, Audi. Audi, welcome once again.
Hey John, thanks for inviting me, because this is actually a very important game to me.
That's right, you have quite a history with this, both going all the way back to when it was released and afterwards, which we will get to. But first, let's follow the advice of the game and press start. But before we start with this crazy plunger going nuts on the title screen there, look at that.
That is just
I'm going to just change the controls because, actually no, I think it's, yeah, I guess because I reset it, saved it. So shoot on A, jump, C dash. All right.
How often did you used to, in games when you were young, how often did you actually change controls in games?
I changed it a lot, especially on the Genesis. You know, because I played the Genesis, not the Mega Drive, back in the day in the US.
Right.
The problem is a lot of Genesis games like to have C as jump, and then B is the action button, and I prefer B as the jump and A as action, and then C is like the third optional whatever button, depending on the game.
See, I just blindly followed the leader. I always just had a default and trusted that that was how the game was meant to be played.
What is it like? I think one of the games, like it's really, it depends on the game. Like with Pitfall, the Mine Adventure, Earthworm Jim, due to the way they work, you always want B as jump in the middle, because if you go to A, roll your thumb to the left, you got like to fire your weapon, and then you hit C to use like a special weapon, or like the whip in Earthworm Jim, right? So
Right.
It's like you want jump to be the central point, and then everything else centers around that. Well, let's go ahead and get into this then. So here we go. This is actually one of the defining characteristics of this game, is this world map, as we'll see. Basically, you can kind of choose where you go, and it's not entirely linear either.
No, this game isn't that linear at all.
I'll start in Duckburg,
as we always
which is called America
in the Japanese version.
Japanese version, as we discovered, which is interesting. So,
This is one of those games that actually has a universal card, one of the earlier games. This was released in December of 91, worldwide. I mean, this was before the Sonic 2 day. So it's interesting.
yeah, that's right. And like you said, this is a universal cart in the sense that it determines the language and stuff based on the region of your Mega Drive / Genesis. So
Right.
if you're playing this on, I am actually playing this on a Japanese system, but it is modded with the switchless mod. So I switched it to American mode here so that everybody can enjoy the story. But you know, as we get into the game and play, I know you have quite a history with this game and are more knowledgeable on it than I am, in fact. So how did you first play this game?
Well, the very first time I played it would be around in December of 99, because this was in fact the very game that made me pick up a Mega Drive, or rather the one that made me beg my mother and dad to pick up another game console, even though the Super Nintendo was looming. And yeah, prior to this, my buddy down the street had a Mega Drive. He got it at launch. And I was never too impressed. It was always just kind of... He played mostly sports games, and those didn't look too hot. And I was just
I guess it would have been like European style, like, you know, football.
Yeah.
Or soccer.
Soccer. Or football, as it should be called.
Football, yeah.
But yeah, so I had seen it. Didn't really feel was that generational leap that I was expecting. You know, I was playing also Amiga at the time, so like, it didn't quite live up to what I was expecting.
And also early games in the system, there are some great ones, but they don't all hold up as well. It's still early. You know, as with any console generation, the first games, you know, they don't really push the hardware yet, and they have some limitations, and yeah.
But for me, the one he told me, because he knew that I was a big Donald Duck fan, we'll get into that, but he actually called me when he got this game for Christmas and said that, hey, you should check out this Donald Duck game. And didn't think much of it, but I went down the street to play some video games. And in my young mind's eye, as I remember sitting here thinking back to that day, I actually, on that TV, that CRT TV back then, saw a living cartoon, because I had never seen anything as vibrant and alive as what I saw from just those beginning moments of QuackShot with Donald walking through that cave and actually seeing the emotion and the fluidity of his animations. I was convinced as a 7-year-old that this was actually a cartoon I was watching. So it's one of those memories I have.
It's an interesting point to make in the sense that you look at this now, it's a fairly early game for the system, I suppose, still.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The size of the sprites, they look great. They're very expressive, except for when I'm getting hit there.
Yeah, you know. Hitbox in this game is a little bit unforgiving due to the size of the sprites. But yeah, when you look at this, I mean, even taking into account the limitations of the Mega Drive's palette, I mean, this looked to me like something that I was expecting from the Amiga or the Super Nintendo coming up. Like, this to me didn't show any limitation, basically. It showed me a living Donald Duck cartoon.
So yeah, I mean, that's obviously the first impression. And I guess we should also discuss that the development team kind of has a history with Disney and Disney-related games.
Right, yeah, so the development team is the very same that did the Castle Evolution series, or Castle Evolution game, and then subsequent series that went under the moniker of the Illusion.
Which I think was one of the more popular and well-known platform games on the system in its early days. And it's still, I think it's a fantastic game.
I think it's one of the most beloved games in the genre on the Sega, of the entire Sega library. I would say that's one of the most popular non-Sonic platformers.
And I think actually they bundled this game and Castle of Illusion together on Saturn. It's sort of one of the Sega
even the
Ages
Mega Drive.
packs.
Eventually, they actually did that pack on the Mega Drive as well in Europe.
They did a double pack of
it.
They
did, absolutely.
That's cool.
So, yeah. The development team was the very same. It was designed by Yamato Emiko, who did the Illusion games. And fantastic designer. She worked for Sega for quite some time, and the composer is the same as well, which is trying to remember the name off the top of my head here, but
the music is quite. I guess you could describe it as it's very much like a cartoon. Like it sounds like it really works well, I think.
Yeah, it was Kamiya Shigenori that did the music for it, and
there you go.
He wasn't a composer for Sega. He wasn't a video game composer at all. He was actually something that the term in Japan is a sci-fi composer, but that's basically a composer for like art projects and kind of atmospheric music. They brought him in, and I think the reason was because they wanted someone with a more atmospheric feel that could create moments in the music, not just backdrops and kind of catchy game music that like you would know from SST, which probably would have been fantastic, but it wasn't Disney.
When we were actually outside the desert stage, you actually had the nice parallax background effect where they're sort of doing the line scrolling, which I always appreciate. But also, you kind of notice how the level design changes a lot. When we are outdoors, it's very much like a linear platforming experience, and when we get indoors here, it turns into this more like navigational challenge, and it's all about collecting items and such to, I guess, upgrade Donald. So like right now there was that wall in Duckburg we need to climb, and this is not a Metroidvania style game, but
no,
it has that style of like you need items to progress, and it requires going back and forth to different stages to get them, and I think that's really interesting design for the time.
That design also allows you to learn the game so cleverly, because piece by piece, it's giving you upgrades which you are being taught to use one after another, rather than having everything there at the get-go. So the challenge becomes greater, yes, but you also become better as you go, very organically. You and I kind of have a bit of a difference in this opinion, but I always felt that Sega's level design in the early 90s they were much better than Nintendo at creating locations in their level designs. And what I mean by that is kind of like, if you look at Green Hill...
I'm not sure we differ. I think Nintendo pulled it off as well, but I know what you mean about a lot of those Sega games. They had a different atmosphere to
Right.
them.
Because you look at like Green Hill Zone, Sonic, and that's the location. Like the Sonic fans definitely feel at home. You know what I mean? In the Green Hill
Yeah.
Zone, it's like coming home. And this game is an interesting one there too, because it's sort of similar in that sense, and also, the progression of this game is kind of natural. You went from the desert into this pyramid. It's not just putting you at the entrance and that's that. Whereas in Mario, it's kind of Lego blocky, and that's the nearest comparison at this point in 1991.
Yeah, that's right. Now, another interesting thing about this game, I think, for me at least, was it kind of turns out, well, first of all, before we continue with that, you notice I got the plunger.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Which is now red.
And exactly.
It's a
It's
proper
a
toilet
fun little
plunger.
detail. Yes, it's a proper plunger, and it now sticks to walls, which is the first power-up that you get. And you probably noticed by now, I've been going into the menu here, so you actually have an inventory.
Yep.
You have different weapons. You gain items that you can use or look at. And of course, you have the call to airplane, which obviously you can't call the airplane from inside the pyramid.
You have to go to the checkpoints.
That's what those flags are for.
Yeah. So early checkpoint system, huh?
And also interesting is after you get that item, you actually have to work your way back out of the temple. They removed some of the hazards, which is nice, but it's kind of rare that you actually have to essentially backtrack through a level that's not in, say, like a Metroidvania style game, which
Right.
again, this really is not. So, it's kind of a fun touch. You really kind of get a feel for the location.
I just, you were mentioning graphics, and I just need to point out again, just look at how alive Donald is in this game. When you duck, he has that magical little expression there.
Oh, yeah,
when he
cute.
walks, he's very confident and cool. When you slide, he has this kind of... Everything he does in this game feels very much alive. And even if you noticed when you were standing still... And...
Does he have the
He has like that...
the idle animation?
He absolutely
Okay,
does.
yeah, he does.
Yeah. And it's very
that's very
similar to...
Donald.
It's very Donald, but it's also very similar to what Sonic would eventually do, because he taps his feet and kind of gets a little bit annoyed that you're not moving forward.
Does he have the edge thing?
I
No.
don't think he does.
He doesn't have that. Now, okay, so we've been talking about this so far, but one of the things that's interesting to me is in America, Donald was kind of just known as this angry duck,
Very
and
one note.
he was rarely the focus of the Disney related media. Mickey Mouse was the big one,
Right.
everything around him, but I've come to learn that Donald was much more popular here in Europe.
Especially, and this goes into kind of why I was so interested in this game, was that in Norway, Donald and Uncle Scrooge has been the most selling comic book of all time since the 50s in Norway. And he's also popular in Scandinavia as a whole. He's called Kalle Anka in Sweden and Anders
Anka.
And in Denmark, for my Scandinavian brothers out there. And he is also in Finland, but I can't pronounce that word. But the interesting part for me to look at Donald's history is, because how did you grow up with Donald? Did you grow up with him being that one note?
Yeah, I mean, I knew him from, some of the older cartoons, but
Right.
then also, of course, at the time I was really into DuckTales,
Right.
which was a great show, and Donald was in there, but he was kind of,
He's a cameo in 1 or 2 episodes.
yeah, exactly. He's not a central
in the
part of
pilot.
that show.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
and-
I shouldn't have even gone here yet.
I don't know. Maybe you should, because this game doesn't really tell you, so you have to figure it out.
That's a good point.
So-
So here we are in Transylvania. But yeah, I mean, of course I knew Donald, but I can't pinpoint like when I would have first experienced him. I hadn't yet spent time reading like the Carl Barks stuff
Yeah,
at the
because
time, and it was not a character I was that familiar with or that into. And so at the time, I didn't play this game back in the day. I knew about Castle of Illusion. I played that, but not this one.
Yeah, because for us, because Americans, yes, primarily would have that image of Donald kind of being the butt of a joke, and like you put a violin in his hands and he'll play Yankee Doodle perfectly on the violin, angry. And that is an aspect of his character, his temper, and that's fun. But for us in Europe, it's strange because I grew up with Donald being a role model. He was a very compassionate and good family man, taking care of his cousins, adventurous and somewhat brave. And this will sound completely opposite, I think, to most of your North American audience. But those Carl Barks stories, and Carl Barks being, of course, the popular comic book writer for the Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck comics from 1950 and upwards.
Yep.
Those were adventure comics, like very much like serials on TV, like Flash Gordon and these kinds of things. That was the type of adventures they were going on, and they were teaching us about morals, about values. So it might sound strange, but one of my role models growing up was Donald Duck.
Huh, that is interesting indeed. And in fact, I didn't realize this until recently. Well, I guess you told me about this, but you actually wrote a rather extensive piece on Donald-related games.
Yeah, this was in a previous life. Many years ago when I was younger and very crazy. Indeed, I did, somehow I managed to rope together many of Sega's staff, many of different people in EA and other Ubisoft, as well as Disney of Europe and Norway, to help me give access to their archives to uncover the entire history of Donald Duck video games. And that article, I did that, and the article is going to be featured in the Donald Duck and Company comic, which was weekly here in Norway until very few years ago. And that didn't come through just due to nothing bad, it just didn't really fit the magazine's structure because it was so big. But it ended up on Hardcore Gaming 101, which is a fantastic website. And yeah, that went through the entire history of Donald Duck video games, including this one. So I got to talk to Emmy Cole, and I got to talk to Disney's licensing people from the 80s and 90s, and it was a crazy time.
Yeah, and I actually just read through some of that and was really kind of fascinated by it.
Yes, I had to dig that up for you, because I don't think that article exists anymore in its original form, unfortunately, and I actually had to dig up an old hard drive.
Oh, that's a shame.
I think what we're going to do, because reading it, I kind of enjoyed going back to it. I think I'm going to make a PDF available in the description of this video, so people can download and read it.
Well, that would be excellent, actually.
Right.
Oh boy, here we go, this part. Ooh.
And this is cool.
I'm concentrating.
I mean,
this is pretty cool, actually.
Again, look at his expression, and and this is a cool... This reminds me a bit of like a Mega Man type obstacle. It's not that closely to it, but Mega Man 1 has these kind of platforms you have to jump to.
It's a little bit trial and error here,
we are definitely going to get frustrated. We're going to get punished Linneman on this game at some points.
That's okay.
But I love punished Linneman, so I'm sure the fans do as well.
Well, the frustrating thing is I'm playing this through the capture card,
which has a delay,
with a little bit of latency, but not just latency, also like, oh, I did it again. Yeah. Why did they put that there? No, that's very strange, because there's another one of these hooks just kind of sitting on the wire, and like your mind just says, "Oh, I have to jump now," because that's what you've had to do up until that point. But for some reason, like, you don't. I guess let's find out. It's a little bit baffling.
You got it.
I was saved there. I still have 2 Donalds.
You do have 2 Donalds. Am I
getting extra lives at some point?
You do get extra lives in this game. Oh. Wait, yeah, see, you're right.
That's what you do. You don't jump there. There you jump.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Man, this is like... Oh, don't go back.
Would you please try out my newest invention?
The Bubblegum Gun. Yeah, so now you get the Bubble Gun.
So this is
another Mega Man nod. The Bubblegum Gun. Which is very close to Bubble Man's weapon. So go back.
Okay, well, I guess back.
I think this is a straight shot. I think this is actually a nice shortcut back.
Check out that moon back there.
It's look at the beautiful landscape here. It's just like there's so much character to the stages.
Multi-layer scrolling going on here, even though it's all just one background. It's a very clever use of that.
So you mentioned the plunger gun, which you mentioned the other thing here, which is that temper meter. We saw it earlier and noticed that you picked up some peppers, and that is indeed it.
Oh yeah.
If you pick up these chili peppers, Donald will get angry, as is his trademark.
Which is odd. I'd be happy, honestly.
With some nice chili peppers. You never had a Carolina Reaper, but
oh, that's true. I will never have one.
No, I have. So yeah, but that pepper will turn you invincible and kind of make you run through the stage. So it's a cool little Donald little nod there. But yeah, so just going back a little bit to the inspiration here, because we were talking about Carl Barks, and when I was doing that research for this specific game, it might not come as a shock to anyone that this game did not start the development cycle as a Donald Duck game. Indeed, it actually was in the pitch stages. It was a DuckTales game.
Oh, yes.
So I say pitch because, like, it was very clear from Sega's side when they were talking to me about it that nothing was ever done under the DuckTales moniker. And as I was researching it, I think there was two specific reasons for this, and there's probably one that people are thinking of right away that isn't necessarily it. But one being that this was released in December 1991, and DuckTales, the cartoon, which I think started in 1987, same year as Ninja Turtles, I believe. That was a very popular cartoon. I think both you and I watched that as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Man, that theme song. It's such a good show, but in 1991, did you glitch the game out? Looked like it.
No. Okay, so I didn't actually want to blow that up.
No. In 1991, the show had run its course. It was actually off TV, and I think it had been signaled with a theatrical movie in the US. I don't think it played theatrically here, so that's why I'm unsure of it. It was like Treasures of Something.
Okay.
I've actually never seen that movie, so that's why I'm a bit unsure. But the show was off TV, and I think from Sega's side then, it was kind of, well, is this property as marketable as just putting a certain other popular duck in the main role? Does that matter to our audience that much? So
that's interesting you say that. I mean, you can really see that this could have been a DuckTales game very easily.
Very
with the whole
easily.
globetrotting and the airplane. It could have been, Launchpad and McQuack in there instead.
Yeah, because you have the plane.
It's all there.
You have the plane, you have the nephews, you have that globetrotting that's even in the NES game, that you can select where you start out, and you kind of have to backtrack a bit based on which levels you pick out. There's a lot of DuckTales in here, and I mean, of course, the treasures you pick up are also from actually some of the Carl Barks comic books. You kind of visit different places that they visited in the comic books. So it's very much a DuckTales game. Just even if you look at the logo of QuackShot, it's kind of similarly laid out. It kind of angles and arches in that similar way that DuckTales does. So
yeah, you're right. I mean, even starring Donald, you could still call this DuckTales, and I think most people wouldn't blink in it. It's just like, okay, yeah.
And I think basically that, along with the fact that, like, in Japan, DuckTales was a popular cartoon. Disney in general is pretty popular in Japan. But DuckTales wasn't the most popular in, like, I think, again, I should research before this, but I think the Japanese name of that show was like Wanpaku Duck Yume Bolken, which is like Rude Duck's Dream Adventure, or Dream Quest. So not the most catchy name. So
really? I mean, that just kind of rolls off the tongue.
Rude Duck's Dream Adventure, yes. Uncle Scrooge should be called Rude Duck. So, yeah, just, I think from a marketing standpoint, Sega just saw more of a easy way to get Donald out than Uncle Scrooge. Some people might, though, and I think you and I talked a little bit about this off camera, so to speak, that Capcom would have had the license to DuckTales at this point in time.
Right. They were using it.
They were using it, but one of the people I talked to when I did the article was a girl named Darlene Lacey, who was in fact the marketing manager for video games at Disney at the time, and her main properties was Donald Duck and DuckTales. And she was a great help to me talking about this. And Disney at this point, and even more so today, was a conglomerate like any other in the world. So game developers and publishers really had no say in terms of who could create games on what consoles, and the exclusivity to attached to that. Disney really just you can make the game, and that's basically it. So, and this is actually apparent when you look at the Mega Drive console, because at the same time as the Tailspin game came out on NES, which was developed by Capcom, there was in fact a Mega Drive version of that game, and even a TurboGrafx version, I think. And
That's right.
Darkwing Duck as well had released on the TurboGrafx. I don't think that had any Mega Drive game. So yeah, the DuckTales license being with Capcom wouldn't have mattered according to Lacey. If Sega had approached them to do it and wanted to, they would have been most likely welcome to do so. But her feeling was just that, again, they were kind of looking to launch their new wave of Saturday morning cartoons like Tailspin and Darkwing Duck, which Darkwing Duck was actually a continuation of DuckTales. So, but yeah, the second point that I kind of figured why this was not a DuckTales game was that in Japan, the Castle Evolution game, made by the same team, had been released under the moniker of I Love Mickey Mouse.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And this game in Japan was released under the title of I Love Donald Duck. It had a subtitle as well, which I remember the katakana being very difficult to read, but it's something like Girasio no Hiho, which is basically like Georgian treasure, I think. I think that's what they're trying to get to. But yeah, so this game kind of follows in the series that we would know as Illusion, because eventually we'd also get World of Illusion, which is called I Love Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. So this would also be a reason for Sega to just kind of go with the Donald moniker, because I Love Uncle Scrooge or I Love Rude Duck probably wouldn't have had the same.
I also love Rude Duck.
I do love my Rude Duck as well, but
it's him. I don't love this guy though.
Maybe you should use the popcorn gun on him.
Good point.
Or are you just supposed to, like... It's a bit of a Mario Boo situation here. Nope. Kind of the whole, like...
He gets all sneaky and he turns into a bunch of ghosts. What a jerk.
Well, he is a ghost. Be fair. He doesn't have much to do when there's no people around to scare.
See, he looks all coy. And then, he gets you.
So another interesting kind of inspiration that you make, or a comparison you make very quickly when you look at this game, especially in the opening sequence, is Indiana Jones. I mean, when you look at Donald, he's wearing the hat, he has the jacket. It's all about treasure hunting.
Indiana Duck.
And when he told me we were going to play this, I actually went back and read several magazines. We found Dracula, who's also a boss in DuckTales.
That's right.
I think he's just contractually obligated to show up as a boss.
You can't actually say, like, Duckula. Isn't that something else?
That is a British cartoon.
Yeah, that's right. Because I always figured that would make a lot of sense.
That had also had a few video games on the Spectrum.
Okay, that was...
Which we will never play.
No. Sorry, Spectrum fans. Yeah. That's the one thing.
Well, they're also known as the worst Spectrum games, just on top of everything.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but the Indiana Jones connection is kind of interesting to me because growing up with the Carl Barks and Don Rosa stories, Indiana Jones, this is post-Indiana Jones, so obviously when you look back at the magazines and stuff, every single one of the reviews say like Donald Duck in Indiana Jones style adventure. But Spielberg and Lucas have actually publicly said that one of the main inspirations for Indiana Jones was the Carl Barks stories of Uncle Scrooge. And this is very apparent if you read, for example, The Seven Cities of Cibola, where the people remove the artifact from the holder, and then the boulder comes running towards them, which is the most famous Indiana Jones sequence. So what, I'm curious, what Disney games were you playing as a kid?
Oh, geez. I mean, Castle Evolution I played. Right. But beyond that, like, I didn't play many Disney games until we started getting the Virgin Interactive stuff. So, like, Aladdin, Lion King, games like that. Well, I guess I played Capcom Disney games. I did play some Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, just the first one. I have the second one now, but at the time I did not. DuckTales was great. So, a variety of games like that, I suppose. But I missed this one. And I did not, I thankfully avoided Fantasia.
Yes, which kind of... Fantasia is interesting because you mentioned Disney Interactive, and that was kind of like when Darlene Lacey and these people within within Disney kind of left, but that was a very big change for Disney because they were taking care of in-house development, or rather kind of taking care of who was going to develop and how they managed their licenses, whereas when they were giving it to Capcom or Sega, it was kind of up to them what they were doing. So
yeah,
I've never been too big of a fan of the Disney Interactive era, at least not in the immediate history that they have after opening up. But yeah, the Fantasia game basically just tricked us all into thinking that it was Castle of Illusion 3, I guess, because there was Land of Illusion on Master System.
Yeah, there was a World of Illusion, I guess.
That was after this, and that is a game. Have you played World of Illusion much?
Yes, I have played that one.
That is a game we have to do Let's Play co-op, because I maintain that might be the finest co-op game of all time.
Huh. Oh, that sounds interesting.
And
I played it in co-op.
Yeah, it actually changes a lot of the game. The structure changes because there's places you can go to only by playing it 2-player. So the entire game's layout changes because of you having a friend along, which is just fantastic. There was 2 other Donald Duck games from Sega though, which
on the Master System.
Yeah, or as the American fans are screaming at you right now, on the Game Gear. Because you guys only got them on the Game Gear, I think.
So there was Lucky Dime Caper, and I think it was Deep Duck Trouble.
Deep Duck Trouble, that is correct.
Yeah, those are quite good, actually.
Fantastic games, and Lucky Dime Caper came out around the same time as this, so it's sort of like a bit of a alternative for those who didn't upgrade to the Mega Drive yet in Europe, because the Master System was very popular.
Yeah, it was. You're right. Yeah, the Master System, has a significant library over here that just we did not get in North America, just in terms of raw numbers. There's a lot of games available.
Yeah, because, sometimes you kind of give me the side eyes a little bit for like, yeah, I love the Master System. You're like, man, is there that many Master System games that are that good? And over time now, I think you kind of come to realize that here in Europe, absolutely, we got so many good games. They just came out much later than...
and that's interesting because the Master System was known for the entertaining box arts,
right?
But there's a point where that shifted, and then you ended up with more traditional, like the type of artwork you might expect in a Mega Drive game, and even the spines, you'd see like a visual graphic representing the artwork on there instead of, the white grid, that original
like the
kind
foot
of art,
kicking, like in Black Belt.
Yeah.
Man, Pro Wrestling might have the best one, though. It's a wrestler headlocking himself.
Yeah. Wrestling with his own head.
Yes. Yeah, so when this game came out, it's interesting because a lot of the magazines I was reading that were Sega-oriented at the time actually mentioned something I hadn't thought of. The NES had not really enjoyed a proper Donald Duck video game, at least an action video game. So it kind of gave... Sega a little bit of an edge over Nintendo on the Disney front, because Donald Duck was, in fact, worldwide the most popular Disney character, even more so than Mickey, who's more popular in the US. Ah, you did it. And that made me think a little bit, because I was thinking, isn't Donald Duck on the NES? And indeed, there was a Famicom-only game for Donald Duck made by Kemco. And that reminded me of a pretty fun story. Oh, so now you opened up the world map.
Where would you suggest going?
It's a good, I'm Norwegian. Let's try the Viking ship.
All right, let's do it.
But yes.
Anyway, continue.
Yes, in my monologue. So yeah, there was a Famicom Donald Duck game by Kemco, only released in Japan. And I remember the story that Darlene shared with me over the phone all those years ago, because I was curious back then why we hadn't seen a proper Donald Duck game on the NES, seeing that there was one in Japan. And she relayed a story to me of the fact that, Kemco was a new company at the time, kind of young and brash. And this was in the 80s, prior to the existence of the proper internet. So, to communicate anything meant long-distance calls and translators with you in the room and that kind of stuff. And as someone who's
wow,
worked with Japanese developers for 2 decades now, I can just tell you that getting any change or any needs across can be quite the challenge even today, unless you have a fax machine. And so she relayed a story to me that like they were making this Donald Duck game, which was this multi-event kind of track and field Olympic game, and the games within it was basically like a sack race where you jump around the sack and you balance some pizzas in front of the tower in Pisa.
Pizza time.
Yeah, like kind of nonsensical but fun little kids games. So Capcom had sent them some footage on a cassette tape for the final submission approval to Disney. And Darlene was in charge of the Donald Duck licensing, so she sat down and watched it and didn't really think much of it. It was kind of boring, she said. However, at the end of that tape, there was a game that she was not expecting to see. On a little ice block, Huey, Dewey, and Louie and Donald Duck were running around clubbing seals. Clubbing them to death. So
okay, well,
she had almost missed this because she was kind of, just kind of like working other things, and then suddenly she looked over the screen and was like, "Oh my, we need to call this company right away." So she hastily found someone within the Disney headquarters that spoke a bit of Japanese or spoke fluently. I'm not sure, but they made that long distance call and explained that dear people, we cannot have Donald clubbing seals as a sport. Is that even a sport anywhere in the world? And this is where I have to interject and say, sadly for humanity, yes, it was. But yeah, Kemco, on the other hand, was sitting there like, well, what's the problem? They're not real seals. You don't need to be upset. Like, Donald's not hurting a real seal. He's just clubbing them in the video game. They don't actually die. And she was quite irritated by this response and trying to explain to them that you cannot release a Disney product where Donald Duck and his nephews are killing seals for sport. This is not acceptable. And indeed, it's shipped without it and was not released in the West. And that might have been a reason why Nintendo and Disney kept it in Japan. It might not have been licensing issues. It might just have been the fact that they weren't really... Because Darlene mentioned that by keeping it in Japan in the 80s and 90s, it wouldn't really escalate should they do something like this and slip it in. So This is prior to the internet. So this might be why.
If you look at the temper meter, tell me that's not Arrow the Acrobat.
That does look
Arrow.
like
that. Is Arrow.
That is Arrow. Yes, I'm sorry, people. I'm talking a lot, but I have so many stories to share.
No, it's great. I love it. This is what we're here for.
So for that Famicom game, the music was done by my dear friend, TM, Hiroyuki Masuno, who was also the composer of Shadowgate, Deja Vu, and Uninvited on the NES, which collectively might be the finest soundtracks on that system. And I became a good friend of his many years ago, and I had actually a dinner with him a couple of years ago now at GDC, and I was reminded of that story, thinking, hey, I wonder if he knows anything about it. So I asked him, do you remember working on this Donald Duck game on the Famicom? He's like, oh yeah, I remember that. You don't forget working on a Donald Duck game. And I was like, yeah. So do you remember anything about Donald, like, clubbing seals? And he was like, yeah, I do kind of remember that. That's a shame it was in there. And so he has never played the game. Now he actually relayed to him the story from Darlene that no, it was taken out because they were quite upset about it. And he was mortified to learn that his brothers at Kemco had not taken this warning from Disney seriously and had fought tooth and nail to keep this seal clubbing in there. So it was indeed true. 30 years later, I could confirm.
It's so weird that they were so attached to that idea.
Seal clubbing.
It's like, we gotta have seal clubbing in there.
Especially when you look at the rest of the games in there. It's like pole vault is in there, but you jump in a sack from left to right. And then suddenly you club seals in the Antarctic. Like, I don't get it. But, yeah. Do you know if the Karl Barks stories and Don Rosa stories, did they ever become popular in the US? Did you remember seeing them at all as a kid?
Yeah, I remember them.
Yeah.
They were I don't know the status of the popularity or anything on there, but I'm familiar with them from that time.
Yeah, if any fans out there watching this and, are a fan still, contact us on Twitter and let us know. Because I'm actually quite curious as a Donald fan, just how many Americans are aware of those Carl Bark stories. If you aren't and listening to this, I would definitely recommend just going to a comic book store and asking them if they have any compendiums or anything. Because if you love adventure and Indiana Jones type things, it is the perfect comic book. It is really good. It has a lot of depth to it and has a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, values and thoughtfulness in the writing. They're quite intelligent and kind of wonderful stories.
Yeah.
What about the new DuckTales cartoon? Have you seen that at all?
Oh, yes, actually. That's quite good, actually, isn't it?
It is fantastic, actually. It's one of my favorite cartoons on TV right now.
Do you recall, I guess it was for April Fools, FDG Entertainment, who published the phenomenal Monster Boy.
Your game of the year.
Yeah. They teased sort of a QuackShot related game with this gorgeous hand-drawn art.
Right. The graphic style was actually taken from that new DuckTales cartoon.
Exactly. And it just looked fantastic.
Yeah.
But sadly, it was April Fool's, and it was not to be. But the thing is, though, is we did actually learn that it was something they had pitched.
But yeah, are you familiar with some of the nods they've done to the video games in that new cartoon?
Yeah, they used the moon theme.
Yeah, that's.
I think
in the second season, there's a character that actually uses that as her theme song and sings it as a lullaby and as a kind of upbeat theme song. And that track was actually done by my dear friend Jay Kaufman, who with his team at Mid Potion remixed that for the cartoon.
Look to the stars, my darling baby boys. Life is strange and vast, filled with wonders and joys. Face each new sun with eyes clear and true, unafraid of the unknown, because I'll face it all with you.
It's really too bad they haven't used that ending track from the Japanese exclusive Donald Duck Maho no Boshi, which was that track is quite special.
This is something you need to promote. The big thing is the timing window when you need to hit things.
Right.
It's not that large, and this extra latency makes it really annoying.
That plunger gun is sort of weird too, because you don't kill enemies with it, you stun them. So your timing is kind of divided between your platforming and the placement of the enemies. So
it's also interesting that they basically got a gun into a Disney game.
They did.
But it's completely non-lethal. Which, yeah, it should be for this. So it kind of works. But, I kind of feel like this is a good place to leave it for now. I didn't have nearly as much experience with this game as you did, but you've kind of suggested, hey, this is a great one to check out. And after that tease, I thought it was worth jumping into because I always enjoy some Mega Drive action. So I kind of feel like I want to sit down and really try to play through this now.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll do some kind of DF retro thing with Donald Duck. It's a pretty large history though, so it's kind of hard to make into a concise episode, but you never know.
Let us know if you want to see that, of course. Over on Twitter or something, just send a message or a tweet and say, hey, we want to see some Donald Duck action. But I think that's going to do it for now. So I'm going to go back to Duckburg and then say thanks for joining me, Audie.
No problem, anytime.
And if you guys enjoyed this video, you know what to do. You click the like button. You come find us on Twitter. And there's some other things that you do as well. That's just how it rolls. But for now, we're going to end it here. So until next time, keep on plunging.